Could there be a postal strike? Also, two major Canadian ports are currently shut down, which is affecting the flow of $1.2 billion worth of daily goods. And why is Trudeau taxing a tax rebate? Well, we're going to discuss it all right now with Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilley. Brian, welcome back. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, Brian, the Trudeau government is taxing a tax rebate, and this has the Canadian Federation of Independent Business furious with the decision. So what can you tell us about this?
So this was supposed to be like the carbon tax rebate that we all get, that was 4 times a year. The government's always telling you, check your bank account.
Yeah.
So small business was promised that they would get something similar to what the consumer carbon tax rebate is. And then they waited and they waited. And you had groups like the CFIB out there fighting for it and saying, hey, look, this is hurting small business. You promised that you would do something. You need to do it. They're finally getting it, but now they've been informed by the government that it's going to be considered a government benefit and therefore taxable. As the CFIB said, Dan Kelly put it, that's like taxing your tax rebate. You get your income tax rebate after you file your taxes, and they say, "Oh, but we've got to tax that now." Or it's exactly like saying, "Oh, the carbon tax is taxable income. Give us back your share." It makes zero sense. And by the sounds of it, it may have the Canada Revenue Agency and the Department of Finance on opposite sides, and one not knowing what the other's doing because they both put out different scenarios on this. However, the finance department is the one that is going to end up calling the shots. So a big push on the Trudeau government now to reverse this insane decision.
With zero sense, like you said there, Brian. Okay, switching gears here, the Union for Canada Post has issued its 72-hour strike notice, meaning Canada Post workers could walk off the job by this weekend. So, Brian, will the Trudeau government move to stop that strike before it happens? So what do you think?
Likely not. That's not how they operate. I mean, hopefully the labor minister is in there and doing his best to put pressure on both sides to work with a mediator to avoid a strike. They've been negotiating for a year and they haven't been able to come to an agreement. This strike makes zero sense to me. Canada Post is a money-losing operation. It's losing business year after year. The workers are not in a good position to make huge demands on them because any demands they make are essentially going to be on us. And people are using Canada Post less and less. Now, I will say that this comes at a horrible time for a lot of small businesses still use it for deliveries. They're going to have to switch. They're going to have to find other alternatives, some of which may be more expensive. But also, here's something I was filling in on talk radio recently here in Toronto when we talked about the possibility of a strike, and a caller called in to say, we have actually a real problem with this in the not-for-profit sector. Charities, especially this time of year, do a lot of their fundraising by direct mail. They're going to have to try and find other ways to reach people if they want to continue to bring in the type of fundraising they normally do. And guess what? People are more generous at the end of the year, either because they're feeling like they're in a good, generous mood due to Christmas, or they want to make donations before the end of the tax year to get that tax rebate that hopefully the government doesn't tax.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think digital giving is kind of the way to go these days. But you're right, Brian. A lot of these nonprofits still use those direct mails, so it could really affect things for sure going forward. And of course, speaking of strikes, workers at the ports of Vancouver and Montreal have been locked out when their union rejected terms of bargaining. So these are Canada's busiest and second busiest ports and account for millions of dollars of trade daily. And the government has moved from simply urging the sides to work it out to ordering binding arbitration. So what does this mean for opening the ports back up?
Like I said with the Canada Post strike, acting before the strike happens and ordering binding arbitration, which they could, isn't the Trudeau government's MO. And right now, Parliament's not sitting, so they couldn't do emergency back to work legislation. And even if Parliament were sitting, they can't do any government business because they're just debating the green slush fund. So this was essentially the only move that they had with the ports. The Vancouver strike was entering its second week, and the Montreal one just started Sunday night. So, uh, you know, having both ports shut down, that would be a huge disadvantage to the Canadian economy. One, it would send goods that are destined for North America to alternative ports, whether it's Halifax in Canada or maybe to New York or Boston on the American East Coast, and then have the goods shipped in other ways. So we would lose out on that business, but also getting goods in and out of the country for businesses. Would stores have supplies for the busy Christmas shopping season, or would that they be out of luck? Would our producers be able to get their goods to export markets? These are all the reasons that we needed to have this come to an end. But the Trudeau government, they acted faster than I thought. But thankfully, this will get the ports moving within a couple of days again.
Yeah, hopefully. Otherwise, what could it mean for the consumer, for just us, a small guy? I mean, we thought that we saw it bad with COVID, with the lack of toilet paper. Could it come to that again, do you think?
Well, think of toy stores, clothing stores, getting in products this time of year. We no longer have an economy that's built on having huge warehouses of goods that you're just waiting to bring from the warehouse into the store. It's just-in-time delivery, and that when the system's working, it's great. But when it's shut down like this, think of pork producers or beef producers across Western Canada trying to send their products to export markets. If you were relying on the Port of Vancouver to ship to Asia, let's say, you weren't getting your product out, or even worse, the product was sitting there, unable to move. Well, the product might be rotting then. So, it's bad for consumers, bad for producers. This is the right move.
Okay, turning our eyes now to south of the border and sort of how it affects us. Brian, the markets soared, and especially energy stocks got a bounce from Donald Trump winning the election. And the Canadian pipeline companies, TC Energy and Enbridge, both shot up. And there's even talk of reviving the Keystone XL pipeline. So while Trump might like the idea, is that something that the Trudeau government would allow?
I'm not clear on exactly what permits they might need to get. And we don't know for sure if TC Energy will go ahead with, Keystone XL. It has been a political football for since 2008, and of course, Trump approved it. They started moving forward. They got some construction done, not enough, and Biden shut it down. But the Trudeau guys are really not pro pipeline. They supported Keystone XL before the Americans said no to it, but would they support it again now when they're making so many moves against the oil and gas industry? I really can't see that happening. They're bringing in their emissions caps, they're bringing in increasing the carbon tax, the just transition plan. All of that points to not supporting the oil and gas industry, which this pipeline would do. Yes, they bought Trans Mountain Pipeline. That's because they messed things up so badly. They also shut down Northern Gateway. They shut down the pipeline that would go to New Brunswick through Quebec, because Quebec said, no, we don't want stinking pipelines here. So having them approve this again or cooperate on it is, we'll have to wait and see. But I would not bet on that.
Okay. And speaking of Donald Trump, he's promised to expand oil and gas activity in the United States and lift a ban on liquefied natural gas exports. Meanwhile, Canada is moving ahead with a cap on emissions, like you said, which the industry and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith call a cap on production. So are you getting any sense that the Trudeau government will walk away from the emissions cap idea?
Oh, smart people, including smart liberals, are saying they should. Bill Morneau, as former finance minister for Justin Trudeau, but also a guy who actually has run a business, said, you know what, this probably isn't the best time for moving forward with the emissions cap. But I don't see Stephen Guilbeault walking away from this. He is a green zealot. It is his religion. He has been this way for decades. Having him move away from this, I think he would quit the government and topple it rather than allow that to continue to pull back from that position. So I think that they're going to continue to go forward with it, which will increasingly put us at odds with American policy. Whether it's past liberal governments or conservative governments, they've often ended up trying to align policies with the Americans because it makes it easier for cross-border business. That's why Stephen Harper in 2008 said he was going to look at bringing in a cap and trade system. Why? Because Barack Obama was going to do it. Then Obama walked away from it, so we walked away from it federally. Trudeau, he's not built that way. He is not going to match the tax cuts and the assistance to expand oil and gas production that Donald Trump will do. So, I think you'll hear a giant sucking sound of investment flowing south from Canada down into the United States. TC Energy is going to do great. Enbridge is going to do great. Guess where a lot of their investments are now? The United States and Mexico.
Right. Now, Trump won't be sworn in until January, so we still got a couple of months to go before the Trump administration takes office. So there's some names being floated for key positions on trade, though, the trade, the border, and national security. So, Brian, what should Canadian leaders expect given the names you've heard?
We're hearing Robert Lighthizer would be returning as trade representative. That's important for us trying to deal with renegotiating NAFTA, or CUSMA as it's now called. He was the guy before. So we know who we're getting involved with there. We know what his priorities will be. On things like the border, though, the southern border is a real concern for Americans, but increasingly our border is becoming a concern. We've gone from very few people being arrested crossing the border from Canada into the United States illegally to it being in the tens of thousands. And the Americans are starting to notice, especially when they're intercepting more than one suspected terrorist per day. Think about that. More than one per day. It's not like they're getting two a day, but it's been more than one a day for this entire year. Suspected terrorists being apprehended, trying to enter the U.S. through legal border crossings. And of course, we had that big arrest a couple of weeks ago of the man trying to head to New York City. Was arrested just south of Montreal near the border. So expect that someone like Tom Homan, who's very much a hardliner on the border, to not only start dealing with deportations, not only start dealing with securing the southern border, but focusing in on what we're doing as well. Trump's also looking at a guy named Mike Waltz for his national security advisor. This guy is a former Green Beret. He's worked in the Defense Department before under Donald Rumsfeld, knows his way around Washington, but he also knows about Canada. We are on his radar, and he takes a very dim view of the Trudeau government. And the fact that we've got, we're underspending on our military, not meeting our NATO target, that we don't take national security very seriously. I think we can expect a hard line from both Homan and Waltz when it comes to dealing with Canada.
Okay. Turning our eyes to Western Canada here, Edmonton MP Randy Boissonnault can't seem to shake off controversy claiming that he was involved in shady business dealings. And we've heard about how he's been conducting business while in cabinet. So what is he being accused of now, Brian?
Of his company trying to get contracts by claiming to be an Indigenous-owned company. Mm-hmm. So Boissonnault was in government, then he was out, then he's back in. In the interim, he went into business with this guy named Stephen Anderson. We heard about the claims that, oh no, I wasn't doing business when I for this company while I was still in when I was back in government. That led to the whole issue of the text from Randy, and then they tried claiming it was another Randy, but there's no other Randy at the company, and now claims that the company was Indigenous owned because the government has special programs for suppliers. If you are an Indigenous owned business, you can apply for certain things that others can't. Well, neither Stephen Anderson nor Randy Boissonnault are Indigenous at all. My understanding is that Boissonnault was adopted by a woman with Métis status, but he, made it clear he does not consider himself Indigenous. He's since put out a statement denouncing Mr. Anderson and saying he never should have gone into business with him. Maybe he shouldn't have been doing business with the government while trying to get reelected. doing business with his old government buddies, and then continuing that while he went back into cabinet. Texting about a business deal from a cabinet meeting, that's a real no-no. So Randy Boissonnault is in a lot of trouble with the voting public, but I don't expect him, or quite frankly, any Liberals, to be reelected in Alberta after the next election.
Oh, wow, interesting. Looks like we're out of time here, but Brian, thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having me.